Good evening. Tonight, we'll hear a sleep story about a woman who, she didn't sleep to dream. She dreamed awake, of men who touched her without hands, of loves that hurt more than wounds, of desires that asked for no permission. Every story she told was a piece of what she lived, or of what she never had the courage to live. Sleep was for the ordinary, for those who settled for dreams they couldn't control, for fantasies that faded with morning light. But Sophia Martinez had discovered something far more intoxicating than sleep. She had learned to dream while awake, and in those dreams, she could have any man she desired. It started 3 months ago on a rain-soaked Tuesday night in her downtown Chicago apartment. Insomnia had been her companion for weeks, a side effect of the antidepressants her doctor prescribed after her divorce. She lay in bed, listening to the city's heartbeat through her window, sirens, late-night conversations, the distant hum of traffic, when something shifted in her consciousness. The room didn't change, but suddenly she wasn't alone. A man materialized in the shadows by her dresser, tall and lean with dark hair that caught the streetlight filtering through her sheer curtains. He wasn't real. She knew that immediately, yet every cell in her body responded as if he were flesh and blood, standing 3 feet away. Her skin tingled with awareness. Her breath caught in her throat, and heat pooled low in her belly. "Who are you?" she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible. He smiled, and even in the dim light, she could see the predatory curve of his lips. "I'm whoever you need me to be, Sophia." The sound of her name on his lips sent electricity down her spine. She sat up slowly, her silk nightgown sliding against her heated skin. This was madness. Talking to a figment of her imagination, responding to a phantom with such visceral desire. Yet she couldn't look away. "This isn't real," she said, more to convince herself than him. "Does it matter?" He took a step closer, and she could swear she felt the air shift around him. "Real is what you feel. Real is what makes your heart race, what makes your skin burn with need. Tell me, Sophia, when was the last time you felt this alive?" The question hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time? Certainly not in her marriage to David, where passion had died somewhere between his promotion and her mother's cancer diagnosis. Not in the sterile dating attempts after their divorce, where men saw her as a consolation prize, a beautiful but broken woman to fix. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He was closer now, close enough that she should have felt his breath on her skin, his body heat. Instead, there was something else, an energy that made every nerve ending sing with anticipation. "I do," he said, his voice low and rough. "It was never. You've never allowed yourself to feel this, have you? To want something just because it sets you on fire." Sophia's pulse hammered against her throat. He was right, and the truth of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. She'd spent 32 years being the good daughter, the perfect wife, the responsible woman who put everyone else's needs before her own desires. Even her fantasies had been careful, controlled, appropriate. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "The question is, what do you want from me?" He extended his hand, palm up, and she stared at it with fascination. "I can give you anything, Sophia. Any touch, any kiss, any moment of passion you've ever craved but been too afraid to ask for. All you have to do is stop thinking and start feeling." Her hand trembled as she reached toward him. The moment her fingertips should have made contact with his palm, something extraordinary happened. Instead of solid flesh, she felt warmth that traveled up her arm like liquid fire. The sensation was more intimate than any physical touch she'd ever experienced. It was as if he'd reached inside her soul and caressed every hidden desire. A soft moan escaped her lips, and her eyes fluttered closed. When she opened them again, he was gone, but the feeling lingered. Her skin hummed with sensitivity. Her body ached with unfulfilled need, and for the first time in months, she felt truly, desperately alive. That was the beginning. Night after night, she gave up on sleep entirely. Why waste time in unconscious dreams when she could craft conscious ones? She learned to summon him with increasing clarity. Sometimes a mysterious dark-haired stranger, sometimes variations. A businessman with piercing blue eyes and hands that knew exactly how to drive her wild. A artist with paint-stained fingers and a poet's soul who whispered dirty promises, while he sketched her curves with his eyes. They never truly touched her, not in the way the physical world understood touch. But what they did was infinitely more intoxicating. They touched her essence, her deepest desires, the parts of herself she kept locked away. Under their phantom caresses, she discovered she was more sensual, more passionate, more beautifully wild than she'd ever imagined. The effect on her waking life was immediate and dramatic. Colleagues at the marketing firm where she worked noticed a change first. The way she moved with new confidence, how her laugh had become throaty and genuine instead of polite and measured. Men began to notice her differently too, their eyes lingering on the sway of her hips, the curve of her smile. But Sophia had tasted something beyond ordinary attraction now. She'd experienced desire without limitations, passion without judgment, intimacy without the messy complications of real relationships. Why settle for fumbling hands and awkward morning afters when she could have perfection in her waking dreams? Her sister Carmen worried. "You look tired. Sophomore, are you sleeping?" "I don't need sleep," Sophia replied, examining her reflection in Carmen's bathroom mirror. Her eyes were bright despite the lack of rest. Her skin glowed with an inner radiance that no amount of concealer could fake. "I need something else entirely. Something dangerous and addictive and absolutely intoxicating. Something that was slowly but surely changing her from the inside out, awakening a woman she'd never known existed. A woman who dared to want everything and refused to apologize for it." Tonight, as she prepared for another sleepless adventure, Sophia smiled at her reflection. The ordinary woman who'd settled for an ordinary marriage to an ordinary man was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned the most seductive secret of all. Sometimes the most powerful dreams were the ones you never had to wake up from. 2 weeks had passed since Sophia's first encounter with her phantom lover, and she'd become an addict craving her next fix. Sleep was now an impossibility she no longer desired. Each night brought new discoveries about the depths of passion that existed beyond the physical realm. Tonight felt different from the moment she stepped into her apartment. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation, thick with an energy that made her skin hypersensitive to even the silk of her blouse against her shoulders. She kicked off her heels and let her hair cascade from its professional updo, dark waves tumbling over her shoulders as she prepared for whatever awaited her in the space between reality and fantasy. The shower felt like a ritual now, washing away the mundane world to prepare for the extraordinary. Hot water streamed over her curves as she imagined hands that weren't hands gliding across her wet skin. Her phantom lovers had taught her that touch wasn't limited to flesh meeting flesh. Real touch, devastating touch, was about connection that transcended the physical boundaries the world insisted were absolute. Wrapped in a towel that felt like silk against her heated skin, Sophia moved to her bedroom. The city lights cast dancing shadows across her walls, and in those shadows, she began to sense a presence. Not the dark-haired stranger from before. This was someone new, someone who made her pulse quicken with nervous excitement. "You're learning," a voice said from the darkness near her window. Rich, cultured, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Learning that the body is just the beginning of desire. Sophia turned toward the sound, her towel slipping slightly as a figure emerged from the shadows. This phantom was different, tall and lean like the others, but there was something almost otherworldly about him. His features seemed to shift subtly in the dim light, as if he were crafted from moonbeams and midnight wishes. "Who are you?" she whispered, though part of her already knew the answer would be whatever she needed it to be. "I'm the part of you that understands true intimacy," he replied, moving closer with fluid grace. "The part that knows the most erotic touch happens in the spaces between souls." Her towel dropped, forgotten, as an invisible caress traced the line of her throat. She gasped at the sensation, not the feeling of fingers on skin, but something far more profound. It was as if warm honey had been poured directly into her bloodstream, spreading liquid fire through every nerve ending. "How?" she breathed, her hands reaching up to touch her throat where the sensation lingered. "Close your eyes, Sophia," he commanded gently. "Stop trying to understand with your mind. Let your body remember what it knew before the world taught you limitations." She obeyed, letting her eyelids flutter closed. Immediately, her other senses heightened. She could feel his presence like a magnetic pull, drawing her forward without any physical contact. The air between them hummed with electricity, and when he spoke again, his voice seemed to caress her from the inside out. In your marriage, you learn that touch could become routine, didn't you? Mechanical, expected rather than desired. His words were like velvet against her consciousness. But what if I told you that the most powerful lovers never need to lay a finger on you to drive you wild? A shiver ran through her entire body as an invisible touch traced the curve of her shoulder, down her arm, leaving trails of sensation that felt more real than any physical caress she'd ever experienced. Her knees nearly buckled with the intensity of it. "This is impossible," she whispered, though her body was already proving her wrong. "Nothing is impossible when two souls recognize each other," he replied. "Feel this." Suddenly, she was surrounded by sensation that defied logic. Invisible hands seemed to map every curve of her body, but instead of touching her skin, they touched something deeper. Each caress sent waves of pleasure through her that started in her core and radiated outward, building to an intensity that made her cry out. "You're touching my soul," she gasped, understanding flooding through her. "Finally, she sees," he murmured approvingly. "Physical touch is just the surface, Sophia. What you're feeling now. This is what happens when someone truly sees you, when they connect with the essence of who you are beneath all the masks you wear for the world." The invisible caresses intensified, and she found herself responding in ways she never had before. Her body arched toward sensations that weren't there. Her hands reached for touches that existed beyond the physical plane. She was being seduced by pure energy, pure connection, and it was more erotic than anything she'd ever experienced. "In your real world," he continued, his voice now seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere, "you've been starving for this kind of connection. Men have touched your body, but who has ever touched your dreams? Who has ever caressed your deepest fantasies and made them real?" She couldn't answer because the truth was devastating. No one had ever seen past her beautiful exterior to the wild, passionate woman she kept hidden inside. No one had ever made her feel this alive, this present, this utterly consumed by desire. The phantom's invisible touch became more intimate, more knowing. He seemed to understand exactly what she needed before she knew it herself. Every hidden fantasy, every secret craving she'd never dared voice. He knew them all and honored them without judgment. "This is what you've been searching for," he whispered, and she felt his words like a caress against her ear. Not just physical pleasure, but recognition. Someone who sees a magnificent, sensual creature you really are and worships every aspect of her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen. For the first time in her life, she felt completely accepted in her desire, completely free to want what she wanted without shame or apology. As the sensations built to a crescendo that left her trembling and breathless, she understood something profound. This wasn't just about sexual pleasure, though the pleasure was incredible. This was about discovering that intimacy could exist on planes she'd never imagined, that the deepest connections happen when souls recognize each other across any barrier. When the intensity finally subsided, leaving her glowing and transformed, the phantom's voice came one last time. "Remember this feeling, Sophia. Remember what it's like to be touched without hands, to be seen without eyes, to be loved without limits. This is your truth now." As his presence faded, Sophia opened her eyes to find herself alone, but forever changed. She discovered that the most profound seduction wasn't about bodies meeting. It was about souls recognizing each other and daring to connect beyond the boundaries the world insisted were real. From now on, she would never again settle for anything less than this kind of soul-deep recognition and desire. The woman who had once been content with ordinary touch was gone forever, replaced by someone who knew the intoxicating power of being loved on levels most people never dared to explore. The conference room felt different today. Sophia sat at the polished mahogany table, her laptop open to quarterly reports, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in the memory of last night's phantom encounter. The invisible touches still lingered on her skin like phantom silk, making her hypersensitive to everything around her. "Martinez, are you listening?" Marcus Webb's voice cut through her reverie like ice through velvet. She looked up to find the vice president of strategic development, studying her with those penetrating steel blue eyes that had intimidated countless employees. Marcus was everything David hadn't been, powerful, commanding, the kind of man who owned every room he entered. At 42, he'd built an empire through sheer force of will and ruthless intelligence. "Of course," she replied smoothly, though her pulse had quickened at the intensity of his stare. "The Johnson account requires a more aggressive approach." Something flickered in his expression, approval mixed with something darker, more predatory. "Exactly. Aggression gets results." His gaze lingered on her mouth as he spoke, and Sophia felt heat pool low in her belly. After the meeting, she returned to her office with trembling hands. Something had shifted in that conference room. Some invisible line had been crossed. Marcus had looked at her differently, not like the competent marketing director she was, but like prey he was considering devouring. That night, as she prepared for her phantom encounters, Sophia found herself thinking about Marcus, his commanding presence, the way his expensive suit couldn't quite hide the powerful bill beneath, the dangerous intelligence that sparked behind those cold eyes. She'd always found him attractive in a forbidden way. He was a superior, untouchable, the kind of man who could destroy her career with a word. But in her dreams, those rules didn't apply. She settled into a ritual, letting the hot shower wash away the day's tensions. As steam filled her bathroom, she felt that familiar electric anticipation building. Tonight would be different. She could sense it in the charged air around her. Wrapped in her silk robe, she moved to her bedroom and found him waiting. Not the ethereal phantom from before, but someone shockingly familiar yet transformed. Marcus stood by her window, but this wasn't the controlled executive from the office. This version of him radiated raw sexual power, his shirt unbuttoned to reveal the strong chest she'd only imagined, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled as if fingers had run through it. "You've been thinking about me," he said, his voice rougher than it had been in the conference room. Not a question, a statement of absolute certainty. "This is wrong," she whispered, though her body was already responding to his presence with devastating intensity. "Wrong." He moved closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his phantom form. "What's wrong is the way you've been hiding your desires behind professional courtesy. What's wrong is pretending you don't feel the electricity between us every time we're in the same room." Her breath caught as he reached toward her face, his finger stopping just short of her cheek. The space between his skin and hers hummed with energy that made her knees weak. "You want to know what power really feels like, don't you, Sophia?" His voice was pure velvet darkness. Not the careful, measured control you show the world, but real power. The kind that comes from surrendering to someone who knows exactly how to handle you. "Marcus, we can't," she started, but he silenced her with a look that could have melted steel. "In here, we can do anything," he said, his phantom presence filling the room with dominant energy. "In here, I'm not your boss and you're not my employee. Here, you're just a woman who's been starving for a man who can match your intensity." He circled her slowly, like a predator studying his prey, and she felt exposed despite her robe. This phantom Marcus saw everything. Every hidden desire, every suppressed fantasy she'd harbored about him during long meetings and late nights at the office. "You've imagined this before," he continued, his voice coming from behind her now. "Wondered what it would feel like to have me take control, to let someone else make the decisions for once. Someone who knows exactly what you need." His presence pressed close behind her, and though he didn't touch her physically, she felt surrounded by his dominance. It was intoxicating, the feeling of being completely known and desired by someone who commanded respect from everyone around him. "Tell me what you want, Sophia," he commanded, his breath seeming to whisper against her ear. "And don't give me some polite, professional answer. Tell me what you really want." The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sophia realized she was at crossroads. She could retreat into safety, maintain the careful boundaries she'd always respected, or she could dive headfirst into dangerous waters of her deepest fantasies. "I want to feel powerful," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I also want to surrender that power to someone who deserves it, someone who can handle me." "Good girl," he murmured approvingly, and the praise sent electricity shooting through her entire body. "Now tell me more. What else do you want?" The floodgates opened then, and words poured from her that she'd never spoken aloud before. She told him about the fantasies she'd harbored during board meetings, about the way his commanding presence made her feel simultaneously intimidated and aroused. She confessed to dreaming about being bent over his executive desk, about the power play of submission to someone who could destroy or elevate her with equal ease. "You want danger," he said when she'd finished, his phantom form now directly in front of her. "You want the thrill of the forbidden, the excitement that comes from playing with fire." "Yes," she breathed, and with that admission, something fundamental shifted in the room. Suddenly, she was pressed against the wall of her bedroom, Marcus's powerful form surrounding her without quite touching. She could feel the heat of his body, the strength in his phantom muscles, the barely leashed control that made him so devastatingly attractive. "This is what you've been craving," he whispered, his mouth near her throat. Not gentle touches and sweet words, but raw, primal desire, the kind of passion that scorches everything in its path. His invisible hands traced her body with possessive hunger, claiming every curve as his territory. Unlike her previous phantom encounters, this felt dangerous, forbidden in ways that made her heart race with more than just desire. This was power exchange at its most primal level, the dance between dominance and submission that she'd never dared explore in her waking life. "You're mine in here," he growled against her throat. "In these dreams, you belong to me completely. No corporate policies, no professional boundaries, just pure, devastating chemistry." The intensity of the encounter left her gasping, trembling against the wall as waves of pleasure crashed over her. This wasn't the gentle, soul-deep connection of her previous phantoms. This was fire and lightning, dangerous and consuming in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. When it was over, Phantom Marcus stepped back, adjusting his phantom tie with the same cool precision she knew from the office. "Remember this feeling tomorrow," he said, his voice returning to that commanding tone she knew so well. "Remember what it feels like to let go of control completely." As his presence faded, Sophia slid down the wall to sit on her bedroom floor, overwhelmed by what she'd just experienced. She'd crossed a line tonight, brought her real world into her phantom realm in ways that felt dangerous and exhilarating. Tomorrow, she would have to face the real Marcus Webb across that conference table, knowing she'd surrendered to his phantom counterpart completely. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her smile with wicked anticipation. 3 days had passed since Sophia's encounter with Phantom Marcus, and the memories still burned through her veins like molten gold. But tonight, something different called to her, something softer yet equally intoxicating. As she moved through her evening ritual, she felt a creative energy pulsing through her apartment, warm and inviting where Marcus's presence had been commanding and dangerous. She'd spent the afternoon at the Chicago Art Institute, drawn by an inexplicable need to surround herself with beauty and creation. Walking to the galleries, she felt something awakening in her. Not the controlled desire of her corporate phantom encounters, but something wilder, more free-flowing. Something that begged to be expressed rather than contained. Now, in her bedroom with candles flickering against the walls, Sophia felt that creative energy coalescing into a presence unlike her previous phantoms. This one appeared slowly, materializing like watercolor bleeding across wet paper. First just an impression of movement, then gradually taking shape. He was beautiful in a way that took her breath away. Not the sharp-edged handsomeness of Marcus or the mysterious allure of her first phantom lover, but something altogether more vulnerable and intense. Long, dark hair fell across sharp cheekbones in his hands. Oh, those hands were stained with paint and charcoal, the hands of someone who created beauty from nothing. "You've been searching for something," he said, his voice warm honey with just a hint of roughness around the edges. "Something your corporate world and your controlled phantoms can't give you." "What?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer would change everything. "Permission to be a masterpiece," he replied, moving closer with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. Permission to be messy and wild and absolutely magnificent. Sophia felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected tenderness in his words. After the power games with Marcus and the soul-deep intensity of her ethereal lover, this phantom offered something different. The chance to be seen not as an object of desire or conquest, but as a work of art worth creating. "I don't understand," she said, though her body was already responding to his presence with a different kind of heat. not the sharp demand of lust, but the slow burn of something deeper. "Then let me show you," he said, raising his paint-stained hands. "Let me paint you with touches instead of brushes. Let me show you what it means to be a canvas for pure passion." He moved around her slowly, studying her with the intensity of an artist planning his masterpiece. His phantom fingers traced the air inches from her skin, and she could swear she felt every gesture like whispered fire across her body. "You're so beautiful," he murmured. But there was something in his tone that made her believe it wasn't just about her physical appearance. "But you've been hiding your colors, haven't you? Living in black and white when you're meant to be painted in fire and gold and deep, rich purples." His words unlocked something in her chest, a longing she carried for years without understanding it. In her marriage, she'd been the perfect wife, neutral and accommodating. In her career, she'd been professional and controlled. Even in her fandom encounters, she'd been responding to others' desires rather than exploring her own creative depths. "I want to paint you," he said, and suddenly her bedroom transformed around them, gone were the neutral walls and careful decor. Instead, they stood in an artist's studio filled with canvases and light, the air thick with the scent of turpentine and possibility. "How?" she asked, looking around at the impossible transformation with wonder. "With my desire," he replied simply. "With my vision of who you really are beneath all those layers of careful control." He began to move around her again, but this time his phantom touches felt like brushstrokes across her soul. Each caress added color to an invisible canvas, and somehow she could feel herself becoming more vibrant, more alive with each passing moment. "Your shoulders," he murmured, his phantom fingers trailing fire across them, "carry too much responsibility. Here, let me paint them gold, the color of strength that doesn't need to prove itself." The sensation was unlike anything she'd experienced. Not the soul-deep connection of her first phantom, or the dangerous dominance of Marcus, but something that felt like being reborn in light and color. She could actually feel herself becoming more beautiful under his phantom touch, more authentic, more completely herself. "Your throat," he continued, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper, "holds back so many words you're afraid to speak. Let me paint it silver, the color of truth waiting to be born." Each area he painted with his phantom caresses came alive with new sensation, new awareness. She felt herself unfurling like a flower in sunlight, revealing aspects of her personality she'd kept hidden even from herself. "Your heart," he said, his phantom hand hovering over her chest, "beats with so much passion you've never let yourself express. This I paint in deep crimson, the color of a woman who dares to love without limits." Tears streamed down her cheeks as his phantom touch awakened something she thought was lost forever, her ability to feel pure joy, pure creative expression, pure connection to her own magnificent nature. "And here," he whispered, his phantom hands tracing her hips, "is where your creative power lives, the place where life and art and passion all converge. This I paint in purple so deep it's almost black, the color of magic waiting to be unleashed." Under his phantom artistry, Sophia felt herself becoming a living canvas, a masterpiece of sensation and color and light. This wasn't about sexual conquest or power games. This was about being seen as a complete work of art, valued for her complexity and her beauty and her wild, creative spirit. "You understand now," he said as his phantom form moved to stand in front of her, his paint-stained fingers framing her face without quite touching. "You're not meant to be contained or controlled or tamed. You're meant to be celebrated exactly as you are, messy and magnificent and absolutely radiant." The climax of their encounter wasn't physical in the way the others had been. It was creative, spiritual, a moment of pure artistic recognition that left her glowing from within. She felt reborn, transformed not through dominance or ethereal connection, but through being truly seen as the masterpiece she was. "Remember this," he whispered as his presence began to fade, the studio around them dissolving back into her bedroom. "Remember that you are not a woman who needs to be fixed or controlled or even elevated. You are a woman who needs to be celebrated and honored and given space to create your own magnificent life." As the phantom artist disappeared, Sophia looked at herself in the mirror and gasped. She looked different, not physically, but energetically. Her eyes sparkled with creative fire. Her skin seemed to glow with inner light. And for the first time in her adult life, she looked at herself and saw not flaws to be corrected, but beauty to be celebrated. She was no longer just a woman who dreamed awake with phantom lovers. She was becoming a woman who understood her own artistic nature, her own creative power, her own magnificent worth. And tomorrow, she would begin living like the masterpiece she'd always been. Some phantoms aren't conjured. They arrive uninvited, carrying the weight of memory and the ache of unfinished love. Sophia learned this on a rain-soaked Thursday night, exactly 1 month after her journey into conscious dreaming began. She'd been expecting her artist phantom, craving his gentle transformation, when instead the air in her bedroom grew heavy with a different kind of energy, one that made her heart race with recognition and dread. She knew before she turned around, knew from the way her pulse stuttered, from a familiar ache that bloomed in her chest like an old wound tearing open. Some loves leave scars so deep they become part of your soul's architecture, and Sophia's deepest scar had a name, Julian Cross. "Hello, Soph," came the voice that had haunted her dreams for 15 years. She spun around, her silk robe clinging to suddenly trembling limbs, and there he was, not as she'd last seen him, angry and hurt in 23, but as he would be now at 38. The boy she'd loved with desperate intensity had become a man, and even as a phantom, he took her breath away. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, his lean frame filled out with the confidence of a man who'd learned to live with heartbreak. But those eyes, those deep brown eyes that had once seen straight through to her soul, they were exactly the same. They held the same mixture of love and pain that had torn her apart all those years ago. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her treacherous heart was already opening to him like a flower to sunlight. "Shouldn't I?" He moved closer, and she caught the phantom scent of his cologne. Cedar and rain and something uniquely him. "You've been dreaming awake with strangers, sophomore. Did you think I wouldn't feel it? Did you think I wouldn't come to claim what was always mine?" The possessiveness in his voice should have angered her. Instead, it made her knees weak with remembered desire. Julian had been her first everything. First love, first heartbreak, first taste of passion so intense it had nearly destroyed them both. "That was a long time ago," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Time had no meaning when it came to Julian. 15 years could have been 15 minutes when he looked at her like that. "Was it?" He reached toward her face, his phantom fingers stopping just short of her cheek. The space between them hummed with electric memory. "Then why can I still make you tremble, without even touching you?" She couldn't answer because he was right. Her body remembered him on a cellular level, remembered the way he used to trace patterns on her bare skin in the dark, the way his laugh would rumble against her chest when she lay in his arms, the way making love with him had felt like coming home and losing herself simultaneously. "I've missed you," he said simply, and the admission hit her like a physical blow. "Don't," she breathed. "Don't do this to me, Julian. I can't." "Can't what?" "Can't remember how good we were together. Can't admit that every man since me has been a pale imitation of what we had." His phantom presence filled the room with the weight of their shared history. College sweethearts who'd burned so bright they'd nearly incinerated each other. The boy who'd written her poetry and made love to her like she was something sacred. The man who'd wanted to marry her before they were ready, who'd pushed for commitment when she was barely 22 and terrified of being trapped. "You left," she reminded him, though the words tasted like ashes. "You pushed me away," he countered. "Every time I tried to get closer, you'd find reasons to create distance. You were so afraid of needing someone that you'd rather lose everything than risk being vulnerable." The truth of it cut deep because she could see now how her patterns had started with him. The same fear of intimacy that had ruined her marriage, that kept her trapped in phantom relationships instead of real ones. It had all begun with Julian, with her terror of loving someone so much it could destroy her. "I was young," she said weakly. "We both were." His phantom form moved closer, and she could feel the heat of their shared memories warming the space between them. But young doesn't mean it wasn't real. Young doesn't mean it didn't matter. He was right in front of her now, close enough that she should have felt his breath on her skin. Instead, she felt something more devastating. The phantom echo of every kiss they'd ever shared, every whispered promise, every moment of perfect connection they destroyed with their youth and fear. "Why are you here?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Because you're finally ready to understand what you threw away, he said. These phantom lovers you've been collecting, they're all pieces of what we had. The soul-deep connection, the power games, the artistic passion. We had all of that and more. His phantom hands rose to frame her face, and even without physical contact, she felt surrounded by him, by memories of sleepy Sunday mornings and passionate midnight arguments, and the way he used to look at her like she was his entire universe. You've been trying to find me in other men for 15 years, he continued, his voice rough with emotion, dividing what we had into manageable pieces, because the whole thing was too intense to handle. But I'm here now, sophomore. All of me. Are you brave enough to face what you lost? Tears streamed down her cheeks as phantom memories washed over her. Julian teaching her to drive his beat-up Toyota, both of them laughing until they cried. Julian holding her while she sobbed over her father's death, his strength becoming her anchor. Julian making love to her with such tender intensity that she'd understood for the first time why people wrote songs about heartbreak. It wouldn't have worked, she whispered. We were too young, too intense. We would have destroyed each other. Maybe, he agreed. Or maybe we would have learned to handle the fire instead of running from it. Maybe we would have grown into the kind of love that could contain all that passion without burning down. His phantom touched Tracer's lips, and she felt herself dissolving into memory and longing. This was different from her other phantom encounters. Raw, more painful, but also more real. Julian knew her in ways no one else ever had. He'd seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway. I can't go back, she said, though every cell in her body was screaming for her try. I'm not asking you to go back, he replied. I'm asking you to stop running forward, to stop hiding in fantasies and face the fact that what we had was real and beautiful and worth fighting for. The phantom encounter that followed was unlike anything she'd experienced. It wasn't just physical or spiritual or creative. It was all of those things combined with the devastating intimacy of shared history. Julian Phantom touched her like a man relearning a map he'd memorized years ago, like someone coming home after long exile, under his phantom caresses. She remembered who she'd been when she was loved completely, wild and free and unafraid of her own intensity. She remembered what it felt like to be cherished not despite her complications, but because of them. This is who you really are, he whispered as waves of remembered passion crashed over her. Not the controlled professional or the phantom dreamer, but this passionate and vulnerable and magnificently alive. When the intensity finally subsided, leaving her gasping and transformed, Julian's phantom form began to fade. But before he disappeared completely, he spoke one last time. The question isn't whether you love me, sophomore. The question is whether you're finally ready to love yourself the way I loved you, completely, fearlessly, without reservation. As his presence vanished, Sophia collapsed onto her bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd just experienced. Julian was right. Every phantom lover had been a fragment of what they'd shared. She'd been trying to recapture pieces of their connection without facing the terrifying reality of the whole. For the first time since beginning her journey into conscious dreaming, Sophia wondered if she was ready to wake up completely, to stop hiding in phantom relationships and face the messy, complicated reality of loving and being loved in return. The ghost of her first love had shown her the deepest truth of all. Some wounds never heal because they're not meant to. They're meant to remain tender, to remind us of our capacity for devastating, transformative love. Not all phantoms come when called. Some arrive like storms, sudden, overwhelming, and utterly beyond control. Sophia discovered this 3 nights after Julian's devastating visit, when she found herself face to face with a presence that made every instinct scream danger even as her body responded with traitorous heat. She hadn't summoned him, hadn't prepared for another phantom encounter at all. Actually, after Julian's emotional ambush, she needed time to process, to understand the implications of what he revealed about her patterns. She'd gone to bed early, hoping for actual sleep for the first time in weeks, when the temperature in her room plummeted and shadows began moving independently of their sources. This phantom materialized differently than the others, not gradually like the artist or with Julian's familiar warmth, but all at once, like smoke solidifying into something far too real. He stood at the foot of her bed, tall and imposing in a way that made her instinctively pull her covers higher. Everything about him radiated controlled menace. Dark hair swept back from sharp features that belonged more on a Renaissance statue than a human face. His clothes were expensive but somehow wrong. Too perfect, too timeless, like a costume chosen to blend in rather than express personality. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Pale green, almost colorless and completely empty of warmth. "Hello, Sophia," he said, and his voice was velvet wrapped around steel. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "I didn't call you," she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded despite the fear crawling up her spine. "No," he agreed, moving closer with predatory grace. "I don't wait for invitations. I take what interests me." Every phantom, before it asked permission in some way, had responded to her desires and boundaries. This one radiated the opposite energy. He was here because he wanted to be, and what she wanted was irrelevant to his agenda. "You need to leave," she said, sitting up straighter despite the way his presence seemed to fill the room with dangerous electricity. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Do I? You've been playing with forces you don't understand, little dreamer. Opening doors in your consciousness without bothering to learn what might walk through them. Did you think you could control all of this forever?" The truth of his words sent ice through her veins. She'd been so focused on the pleasure and transformation her phantoms brought that she'd never considered there might be others. Darker presences drawn to the psychic energy she'd been broadcasting night after night. "What do you want?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "What I've always wanted," he replied, circling her bed like a shark scenting blood. "To show you what desire looks like when it stops asking permission. When it stops pretending to be civilized and polite and safe." His phantom presence pressed against her consciousness in ways the others never had. Where Julian had brought emotional intimacy and Marcus had offered power exchange, this stranger brought something rawer. The acknowledgement that desire could be dangerous, that passion could consume rather than fulfill. "Your other phantoms have been so respectful," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to come from inside her own head. "So concerned with your pleasure, your comfort, your growth. But what about the desires you're too afraid to admit? The ones that scare you because they reveal how much you crave losing control completely." Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs as he spoke truths she'd never admitted to herself. There were fantasies she'd pushed away, desires she'd labeled as too dark or dangerous to explore. The part of her that wanted to be taken rather than seduced, claimed rather than courted, overwhelmed rather than gently transformed. "I don't," she started, but he cut her off with a look that could have frozen fire. "Don't lie to me, Sophia. I can see every hidden desire, every suppressed craving. The part of you that's tired of being in control all the time. The part that wants to be stripped of choice and responsibility and given exactly what you need, whether you're brave enough to ask for it or not." His phantom form loomed over her now, and she could feel the darkness radiating from him like heat from a fire. This wasn't the controlled dominance Marcus had offered. This was something wilder, more primal, the acknowledgement that sometimes desire operated outside the boundaries of consent and safety. "You're afraid of me," he observed with satisfaction. "Good. Fear sharpens everything, makes every sensation more intense, every moment more vivid. Your polite phantoms could never give you this." He was right, and that realization terrified her more than his presence. Her pulse was racing not just with fear, but with a dark excitement she didn't want to acknowledge. This phantom represented every dangerous fantasy she'd ever suppressed. Every moment she'd wondered what it would feel like to have choice taken away entirely. "Stop," she whispered, but the word came out breathless rather than commanding. "Make me," he challenged, and suddenly she understood that this phantom operated by different rules. Her other lovers had been extensions of her own psyche, manifestations of her desires given form. This one felt separate, autonomous, something that existed independently of her will. The encounter that followed was unlike anything she'd experienced. Where her other phantoms had touched her soul or dominated her body or celebrated her essence, this stranger seemed to feed on her fear and confusion. His phantom touches were demanding rather than giving, taking what he wanted without concern for comfort or pleasure. Yet even as terror flooded her system, she found herself responding with shocking intensity. This was desire stripped of pretense, passion without the veneer of romance or spiritual connection, raw and primal, and absolutely devastating in its honesty about the darker aspects of human sexuality. "You see," he whispered as she trembled beneath his phantom assault. "This is what you've been missing. This is what happens when desire stops pretending to be civilized, when it admits that sometimes we want to be consumed rather than cherished." The experience left her shaken and confused, questioning everything she thought she knew about her own desires. When it was over, the stranger didn't fade like her other phantoms. He simply stepped back, straightening his perfect clothes with casual arrogance. "I'll be back," he said, and it sounded more like a promise than a threat. "Now that I know how much you enjoyed pretending you didn't want this, I'll be back whenever you need reminding of who you really are beneath all that careful control." "I didn't enjoy," she started, but he silenced her with a knowing smile. "Your body says otherwise, little dreamer. But don't worry, I'll keep your secrets. After all, we wouldn't want to ruin the pretty fantasy you've built about being a woman who only wants gentle passion and respectful lovers." As his presence vanished, leaving her alone and trembling, Sophia was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Some part of her had responded to his darkness, had craved the intensity that came with genuine fear and loss of control. It wasn't something she was proud of, but she couldn't deny the way her body had betrayed her principles. The dangerous stranger had shown her that her phantom world wasn't the safe playground she believed it to be. There were darker currents running beneath her conscious desires, drives and cravings she spent years suppressing because they didn't fit her image of who she wanted to be. As she lay in bed afterward, still shaking from the encounter, Sophia realized she'd reached a crossroads. She could continue down this path, accepting that her phantom world included dangers as well as pleasures, or she could find the courage to step away from dreaming altogether. Either choice would require facing parts of herself she'd rather keep hidden. The question was, how much of her true self was she finally ready to acknowledge? After the dangerous stranger's uninvited visit, Sophia spent 3 days avoiding her bedroom entirely. She worked late, went to Carmen's house, even considered checking into a hotel. Anything to avoid confronting what had happened and what it revealed about the darker corners of her desires. But phantoms, she was learning, weren't confined to specific locations. They lived in the spaces between consciousness and dream, and those spaces existed wherever she was. On Saturday morning, standing in her bathroom preparing for another sleepless day, Sophia caught sight of herself in the mirror and stopped cold. The reflection looking back at her was a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, with the haunted look of someone running from herself. The confident, glowing woman who'd emerged from her early phantom encounters was gone, replaced by someone who looked fragile and afraid. "Look at what you become," she whispered to her reflection, and was startled when the reflection seemed to whisper back. But the voice wasn't quite her own. It was warmer, more compassionate, tinged with a wisdom she didn't recognize. And when she looked closer, the reflection wasn't moving in perfect synchronization with her movements. "Not what I become," the reflection said, stepping slightly out of phase with Sophia's own motion. "What I've always been. The question is whether you're finally ready to see me clearly." Sophia stumbled backward, her heart racing. This wasn't possible. Reflections didn't speak independently, didn't move with their own accord. But then again, none of what she'd been experiencing should have been possible. "Another phantom," she breathed, and her reflection smiled sadly. "Not another phantom, Sophia. The original. The one you've been running from your entire life." The reflection moved closer to the mirror's surface, and Sophia could see details that should have matched her own, but somehow didn't. Eyes that held more peace, a mouth that curved with self-acceptance rather than constant criticism. "I don't understand," Sophia said, though part of her was beginning to. All those phantoms, the mysterious stranger, the soul toucher, Marcus, the artist, Julian, even the dangerous one. They were all reflections of parts of yourself you've been too afraid to integrate. Pieces of who you are that you projected onto imaginary lovers because you couldn't accept them as part of your own nature. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. Sophia sank onto the edge of her bathtub, staring at her reflection with new understanding. They were all me? Aspects of you, yes. Your capacity for mystery and sensuality, your ability to connect deeply with others, your desire for power and control, your artistic and creative nature, your capacity for devastating love, even your darker desires, all parts of the complete woman you've never allowed yourself to be. Her reflection moved independently again, settling into a pose that radiated the kind of self-possession Sophia had always envied in other women. You spent your entire adult life fragmenting yourself, deciding which parts were acceptable and which needed to be hidden away. The good daughter, the perfect wife, the professional woman, all careful roles designed to avoid showing full spectrum of who you are. Because the full spectrum is too much, Sophia protested. Too intense, too complicated, too likely to overwhelm people. Says who? Her reflection challenged. Julian? He fell in love with your intensity, not despite it, but because of it. You're the one who decided it was too much. You're the one who chose to break your own heart rather than risk being rejected for who you really are. Tears streamed down Sophia's cheeks as 32 years of self-rejection came crashing down around her. Every time she dimmed her light to make others comfortable, every time she'd apologize for her passion or her complexity, every relationship she'd sabotage because vulnerability felt too dangerous. The phantom lovers weren't real, she whispered. They were as real as you allowed them to be. They were your own magnificent nature, externalized and given permission to touch you the way you've never allowed yourself to be touched, with complete acceptance and celebration. Her reflection stood and moved closer to the mirror, pressing her palm against the glass from the other side. Touch me, Sophia. Not a phantom, not a projection, but yourself, the woman you've been too afraid to love. With trembling fingers, Sophia reached toward the mirror, pressing her palm against her reflections. The moment their hands met, glass between them, but energy connecting them, everything changed. Suddenly, she was experiencing every phantom encounter from a completely different perspective. She was a mysterious stranger who'd first appeared in her bedroom, seducing herself into acknowledging her own sensual nature. She was a soul toucher, offering herself the deep connection she'd always craved. She was Marcus, giving herself permission to explore power and dominance. She was the artist, celebrating her own creative magnificence. She was Julian, loving herself with the devastating intensity she'd always been afraid to accept. Even the dangerous stranger, she was him too. The part of herself that was tired of being careful and controlled, that wanted to explore the darker aspects of desire without judgment or shame. My God, she breathed, understanding flooding through her. I've been making love to myself this entire time. Finally, her reflection smiled, and now they were moving in perfect synchronization again. You've been courting yourself, seducing yourself, showing yourself all the different ways you deserve to be loved. Every phantom was a love letter from your soul to your conscious mind. The realization was overwhelming and liberating in equal measure. She hadn't been hiding from real intimacy by escaping into phantom relationships. She'd been learning real intimacy by practicing it with herself first, learning to accept every aspect of her nature, to find beauty in her complexity, to stop demanding that she be simple enough for others to understand easily. But why phantoms? She asked. Why couldn't I just accept myself directly? Because you needed to experience being loved unconditionally before you could believe you deserved it. Her reflection explained. You needed to feel what it was like to be seen completely and celebrated entirely before you could offer that gift to yourself. Standing there in her bathroom, palm pressed to the mirror, Sophia felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. For the first time in her adult life, she looked at herself with the same appreciation she'd felt for her phantom lovers. She saw her own mystery, her depth, her capacity for passion and creativity and devastating love. I'm beautiful, she said, and it wasn't vanity. It was recognition. You're magnificent, her reflection agreed. You always have been. You just needed to see yourself through loving eyes to believe it. The encounter that followed was unlike any of the phantom experiences that had come before. This time, she was both lover and beloved, giver and receiver, seeing herself through eyes that held nothing but acceptance and desire. Every caress she imagined giving herself, every word of appreciation, every moment of passionate recognition. It was all real because she was finally loving herself without reservation. When the intensity subsided, leaving her glowing with self-acceptance, her reflection spoke one last time. Now you understand the real power of dreaming awake. It was never about escaping reality. It was about discovering who you really are beneath all the layers of fear and conditioning. Now you can love others from a place of wholeness instead of need, passion instead of desperation. As her reflection settled back into perfect synchronization with her movements, Sophia understood that she'd reached the true turning point of her journey. She'd learned to love herself not in pieces, but as a complete, complex, magnificently complicated woman. The question now wasn't whether she was ready for real love. It was whether the world was ready for the woman she'd finally become. Standing in front of her mirror, Sophia smiled at herself with genuine appreciation and whispered the words she'd been waiting 32 years to hear. I love you exactly as you are. And for the first time, she completely meant it. The revelation in the mirror changed everything and nothing. Sophia understood now that her phantom lovers had been pieces of herself. But understanding and integration were different things entirely. For 3 weeks after her encounter with her reflection, she found herself caught between two worlds. The intoxicating realm of conscious dreams where she could love herself without limits, and the harsh fluorescent reality of her everyday life where vulnerability still felt like a dangerous luxury. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in the most unlikely place, the office coffee machine on the 14th floor of her building. She was working late again, avoiding her apartment and the choice she knew was waiting there, when she heard a voice behind her. Long day? She turned to find a man she'd never seen before, though something about him felt familiar. He was tall without being imposing, with kind eyes and an easy smile that seemed genuinely interested rather than predatory. His suit was expensive but rumpled, as if he'd actually been working rather than posing. The longest, she replied, surprised by how easy it felt to talk to him. You. Same. I'm Alex Chun, by the way. I just transferred to strategic planning from the San Francisco office. He extended his hand, and when she shook it, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The simple pleasure of human contact without phantom enhancement or supernatural intensity. Sophia Martinez. Marketing. His hand was warm, calloused, real in a way that made her suddenly aware of how much she'd been living in her head lately. The Sophia Martinez? The one who landed the Harrison Industries account. His eyes lit up with genuine admiration. That campaign was brilliant. I used it as a case study in my last presentation. Heat flooded her cheeks. Not the otherworldly fire of phantom encounters, but the simple warmth of professional recognition. Thank you. That means a lot. They talked for 20 minutes by the coffee machine, and Sophia found herself laughing. Really laughing, for the first time in weeks. Alex was funny without trying too hard, intelligent without being condescending, and interested in her thoughts rather than just her appearance. When he finally glanced at his watch and grimaced, she felt disappointed rather than relieved. I should get going, he said. Early meeting tomorrow. But he hesitated, suddenly looking younger and less sure of himself. Would you maybe want to grab dinner sometime? Somewhere that doesn't serve coffee in paper cups? The simple question hit her like a thunderbolt. Here was a real man, asking for real time, offering real connection. Everything she'd been practicing with her phantoms suddenly felt like preparation for this moment. The choice between the perfect safety of her dream world and the messy uncertainty of actual intimacy. She started, then stopped. The old Sophia would have found an excuse, would have retreated into the safety of phantom lovers who couldn't reject her or disappoint her, or require her to be vulnerable in uncomfortable ways. But the woman looking back at her from mirrors now wouldn't settle for safety over authenticity. I'd like that, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. His smile transformed his entire face. Really? Great. How about Friday? There's this little Italian place I've been wanting to try. As they made plans, Sophia felt something shifting inside her chest. Excitement mixed with terror, anticipation threaded with the awareness that real relationships required showing up as her complete, complicated self rather than carefully curated versions. That night, she sat in her bedroom for the first time in weeks, waiting to see which world would claim her. The phantom realm felt different now, less electric, less compelling. She could sense her various lovers waiting in the shadows, but they felt distant, like echoes of experiences rather than immediate possibilities. Instead of summoning them, she found herself thinking about Alex, about the way his laugh had crinkled the corners of his eyes, the way he'd listened when she talked about her work, the way his presence had made her feel grounded rather than ethereal. "You're thinking about him," came a familiar voice from the shadows, not demanding or possessive like the dangerous stranger, but warm with understanding. Her original phantom lover, the mysterious one who'd started this entire journey, materialized beside her window. "Yes," she admitted, no longer afraid of her own honesty. "Good," he said, and his smile held something she'd never seen before, genuine happiness for her rather than desire to possess her. "That means it's working." "What's working?" "The whole point of this journey, Sophia. We were never meant to be your destination. We were meant to be your teachers, your practice partners, your way of learning to love fearlessly so you could do it in the real world." She looked at him with new understanding. Even now, knowing he was a projection of her own psyche, he felt real and separate and genuinely caring. "But what if I choose wrong? What if I'm not ready?" "Then you'll learn and try again," he said simply. That's what real love is, not the perfect passion of dreams, but the willingness to keep showing up even when it's messy and uncertain and requires more courage than you think you have. Over the following days, Sophia found herself living in both worlds simultaneously. By day, she texted with Alex, felt butterflies when his name appeared on her phone, counted down the hours until their dinner date. By night, she occasionally visited with her phantom lovers, but the encounters felt different now. Less desperate, more like conversations with old friends who were preparing to say goodbye. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Chicago. Sophia spent an hour getting ready, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on a simple black dress that made her feel confident without trying too hard. As she applied lipstick, her reflection caught her eye and smiled. Not independently this time, but in perfect synchronization, as if all parts of herself were finally aligned. The restaurant Alex had chosen was small and intimate, with soft lighting and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged long conversations. When she saw him waiting at a corner table, already having ordered wine, her heart did something it hadn't done in months. It skipped with genuine anticipation rather than phantom-induced excitement. "You look beautiful," he said as she sat down, and the simple compliment meant more than all the elaborate praise her phantom lovers had lavished on her. They talked for 3 hours, about work, about their childhoods, about books and travel, and dreams of the future. Alex told her about his divorce 2 years earlier, about learning to live alone after 15 years of marriage. Sophia found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. Her fears about intimacy, her tendency to disappear into her own head, her recent journey towards self-acceptance. "It sounds like you've been doing some serious soul-searching," Alex said, his eyes warm with understanding rather than judgment. "You could say that," Sophia replied. "I've been learning to love myself first, so I can love someone else from a place of wholeness instead of need." "That's incredibly brave," he said, and she could tell he meant it. Most people spend their whole lives looking for someone else to complete them instead of doing the work to become whole first. When he walked to her car, Sophia felt the weight of choice settling around her like a cloak. This was the moment. She could retreat to her phantom lovers in the perfect safety of imagined passion, or she could step fully into the uncertain beauty of real connection. "I had an amazing time tonight," Alex said, stopping beside her car. "I'd love to see you again if you're interested." Instead of answering immediately, Sophia looked at him, really looked. He wasn't perfect like her phantoms. His hair was slightly messy from the wind. He had laughed lines that spoke of a life fully lived, and there was a vulnerability in his eyes that her phantom lovers had never possessed. He was real and flawed and present in a way that made her heart race with possibility rather than fantasy. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like a declaration of independence from the safe half-life she'd been living. "I'd love that." When he kissed her goodnight, a soft, tentative kiss that tasted like wine and promises, Sophia felt something she'd never experienced with her phantom lovers. Not the overwhelming intensity of perfect passion, but something quieter and more sustainable. Hope. As she drove home, she knew the choice had been made. Her phantom lovers had taught her to love fearlessly, and now it was time to practice that lesson in the real world. The woman who dreamed awake was finally ready to live awake too. 6 months later, Sophia Martinez stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying lipstick before another dinner with Alex, and marveled at how different everything looked. The same reflection that had once spoken to her independently now smiled back in perfect synchronization. Not because she'd lost her phantom world, but because she finally integrated all parts of herself into one authentic woman. The phantom lovers still existed in the spaces between dreaming and waking, but they'd evolved into something new. They were no longer escapes from reality, but rather guardians of the truths she'd learned about love, passion, and self-acceptance. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she could sense their presence, not as separate entities, but as aspects of her own nature that she now carried openly into the world. Her relationship with Alex had unfolded like a flower opening slowly to sunlight. There had been awkward moments, misunderstandings, nights when her old patterns of fear threatened to send her running back to the safety of phantom perfection. But each time, she'd chosen vulnerability over safety, authenticity over control, and discovered that real love was far more resilient than she'd ever imagined. "You're different," Alex had told her one evening about 3 months into their relationship, as they lay tangled together in his bed, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Different from anyone I've ever been with." "Different how?" she'd asked, tracing lazy patterns on his skin. "Complete," he'd said after thinking about it. "Like you know exactly who you are, and you're not apologizing for any of it. It's incredibly sexy." She'd smiled against his chest, understanding that her phantom journey had given her something invaluable, the ability to love and be loved from a place of wholeness rather than need. Tonight was special, though she was the only one who knew it yet. Alex had suggested dinner at the same small Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date, claiming he wanted to recreate that perfect evening. What he didn't know was that Sophia had been carrying an engagement ring in her purse for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to propose to him. The old Sophia would have waited for him to make the first move, would have followed traditional scripts about who was supposed to do the asking. But the woman she'd become understood that love was about courage, not convention. She knew what she wanted, and she was no longer afraid to reach for it. "Ready?" Alex called from the living room, and she could hear the nervous energy in his voice. He'd been jittery all day, checking his phone obsessively and running his hands through his hair, tells she'd learned to recognize over their months together. "Almost," she called back, taking one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back radiated confidence and joy, her eyes bright with the kind of happiness that came from living authentically. She looked like someone who had learned to love herself completely and was now ready to share that love generously with the world. At the restaurant, Alex seemed even more nervous than he'd been at home. His hand shook slightly as he ordered wine, and he kept reaching into his jacket pocket as if checking for something. Sophia watched him with growing amusement and affection, realizing what was happening. "Alex," she said gently, reaching across the table to cover his trembling hand with hers. "Are you okay? You seem—" "I'm perfect," he said quickly, then laughed at himself. "Actually, no, I'm terrified, but in a good way, in the best way." "Why?" she asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew. Instead of answering, he pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between them with shaking fingers. "Because I was going to ask you to marry me, and I've been practicing this speech for weeks, and now I can't remember a single word of it." Sophia's heart soared, not because she was surprised by his proposal, but because of the beautiful synchronicity of the moment. Here they were, two people who had found their way to authentic love, both brave enough to reach for what they wanted. "Alex," she said softly, pulling her own small velvet box from her purse and setting it beside his. "I was going to ask you the same thing." His eyes widened as he stared at the 2 ring boxes sitting side by side on the white tablecloth. "You were going to propose to me?" "Yes," she said, laughing at the wonder in his voice. "Because I learned something important over the past year. I learned that when you know what you want, when you love someone completely and they love you back the same way, there's no point in waiting for someone else to be brave enough to say it first. So we're both." He began, then started laughing, deep, delighted laughter that drew smiles from other diners. Both terrified, both certain, both ready to spend our lives figuring out how to love each other better every day, she finished. They opened the ring boxes simultaneously, revealing matching bands. His a simple platinum ring, hers a vintage diamond that caught the candlelight like captured starfire. Without discussion, they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, both of them crying and laughing in equal measure. "Yes," Alex said, lifting her hand to his lips to kiss the ring he'd just placed there. "Yes," Sophia echoed, bringing his hand to her heart, so he could feel how steady and sure it beat. Later that night, making love in Alex's apartment, Sophia experienced something she'd never felt with her phantom lovers despite all their otherworldly intensity. She felt completely present, completely seen, completely known by another person who chose to love her not in spite of her complexity, but because of it. As Alex moved above her, his eyes locked on hers, she understood that this was what her phantom journey had been preparing her for. Not perfect passion, but present passion. Not love without risk, but love worth risking everything for. "I love you," she whispered against his lips, and the words carried the weight of everything she'd learned about loving herself, about accepting her own magnificent contradictions, about being brave enough to show up authentically in love. "I love you too," he whispered back, and she could feel the truth of it in every cell of her body. In the afterglow, as they lay wrapped around each other, Sophia felt a familiar presence in the room, not threatening or demanding, but warm with approval. Her phantom lovers, all of them, gathered in the shadows not to seduce her away from reality, but to witness the culmination of everything they'd taught her. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, and she could have sworn she heard them whisper back. "You did this, beautiful. You learned to love yourself, and now look what's possible." 3 months later, at their wedding in the botanical gardens where spring flowers bloomed in defiant abundance, Sophia stood before Alex and promised to love him with the same fearless passion she'd learned to bring to loving herself. In the audience, she could see Carmen crying happy tears, see colleagues from work smiling with genuine joy, see all the people who had watched her transformation from careful, controlled woman to someone radiant with authentic happiness. But more than that, she could feel the presence of her phantom lovers woven throughout the ceremony, not as separate entities, but as integrated aspects of her own nature. The mystery and sensuality, the deep soul connection, the power and creativity, the devastating capacity for love, even the acknowledgement of her darker desires, all that was present in the woman saying, "I do," with complete confidence and joy. As Alex kissed her at the altar, Sophia understood that her journey from dreaming awake to living awake was complete. She was no longer a woman who needed phantom lovers to feel whole, nor was she someone who had to choose between passionate intensity and sustainable love. She was simply Sophia, complex and complete, passionate and present, a woman who had learned to dream awake, so she could love awake, who had practiced with phantoms, so she could show up authentically for reality. In her final moments of quiet before the celebration began, she whispered one last thank you to the mirror, to the phantoms, to the journey that had brought her here. Then she turned toward her new husband, toward their friends and family, toward the messy and beautiful reality of a life lived fully awake. The woman who had once dreamed of perfect love had learned to create authentic love instead. And that, she realized as Alex spun her around the dance floor while their wedding guests cheered, was the most beautiful dream of all, the one you gotta live every single day.